In the early 80s, a series of savage attacks occurred in the Twin City area of Minnesota, USA. The victims were all women. Police struggled in the initial part of the investigation. There was no physical evidence left by the attacker, and there were no witnesses. But there was one person who wanted to help the police. The man responsible. He called 911 after committing the attacks. The tapes were released to the public in the hopes that somebody would recognise the voice. This is how he came to be known as the Weepy Voice Killer. But was he just taunting the police? Or did he really want to be stopped?
Yes, please, this is an emergency. Please send a squad to Casefile Road, Malmberg Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
On the 31st of December 1980, university student Karen Potak was out celebrating New Year's Eve with her sisters on University Avenue, in an area known as the Twin Cities in Minnesota, USA. The city of St. Paul, which is the state capital of Minnesota, is on one side of University Avenue, and the city of Minneapolis, which is the largest city in Minnesota, is on the other side of University Avenue. It was a nice cold winter's night, with temperatures below freezing. After midnight had struck, Karen wandered out of the bar she was in with her sisters. She walked around the streets in the freezing cold, all alone, still drinking from a glass of champagne. She made her way up an alleyway, which was deserted other than one car which drove past her. A male driver was the only person in the car. He noticed that Karen didn't have a jacket and she looked freezing cold. The male driver stopped the car and told Karen to jump in. He had the heater on and his car was nice and warm, and he could give her a ride to wherever she needed to go. The lure of a nice warm car and a free ride was too much for Karen to resist, and she eagerly jumped in. About 3 a.m. that morning, the following call was made to 911.
Yes, please, this is an emergency. Please send a squad to Casefile Road, Malmberg Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened to her?
Just hurry, she's laid on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks, by the entrance. Hurry.
What's the address?
I don't know.
Who are you?
Police responded to the call and found Karen Potak lying on the ground near the railway tracks behind the Malmberg Manufacturing Company on Syndicate Street North, St. Paul, an area that was completely deserted at night. Karen was naked and had been viciously beaten with a tire iron. Her skull was cracked open, but she was alive. Karen was rushed to hospital and treated. She survived the attack, but it was so vicious it was deemed to be an attempted murder. Karen was later questioned at length by police, but she had no memory of the attack itself and no memory of who was responsible. No physical evidence was located to identify the attacker, and there were no witnesses at all. With Karen unable to provide police with any information, the case went cold very quickly, and nobody was arrested. 18-year-old Kimberly Compton was from the small town of Pepin, Wisconsin, with a population of less than 1,000 people. After graduating from high school, Kimberly packed her bags and got on a bus headed for Minnesota's capital city, St. Paul. Like so many other small town high school graduates before and after her, she couldn't wait to leave and start the next chapter of her life in the city. On the 3rd of June 1981, Kimberly stepped off her Greyhound bus in downtown St. Paul. She hired locker number 750 in the Greyhound bus depot, where she placed both of her bags. The first thing Kimberly wanted to do was to eat. She was starving, and she was in luck. Directly across the road from the bus depot was Mickey's Diner. They had a special on too, barbecue beef and fries, and that's what Kimberly ordered. She sat down in a booth to eat, and sitting a few booths away from her was a man also enjoying a meal. He noticed Kimberly sitting alone, and he walked over and struck up a conversation with her. Kimberly told him she'd only just arrived to the city and didn't know her way around yet. The man was only too happy to offer to drive Kimberly around and show her the sights of St. Paul. Kimberly eagerly accepted. She couldn't wait to explore the city and was happy that she had a local to help show her around. Kimberly and her new friend finished their meals and then left Mickey's diner together. A few hours later, the following call was made to 911.
Oh, you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody.
Hello? Are you there?
Police responded and found Kimberly Compton laying face down near an unfinished freeway just south of St. Paul. It was a secluded area where you could catch a nice view of the Mississippi River. The killer had driven Kimberly there and then used the promise of that nice view to lure Kimberly out of the car. She was then savagely attacked. Kimberly was stabbed 61 times with an ice pick and was dead when police arrived. Kimberly couldn't wait to graduate high school and leave the small town of Pepin behind her. But only hours after leaving and arriving in St. Paul, she had been brutally murdered. Kimberly had no identification on her, but police found her Greyhound bus depot locker key. They found her locker and her bags, and that's how the initial identification was done. The autopsy showed an undigested meal in her stomach, which is how police were able to piece together her movements. They knew that Mickey's diner was across the road from the bus depot, and when they saw the special they had that night that Kimberly arrived in town matched what was in her stomach, they were able to piece her movements together. They immediately interviewed the staff of Mickey's diner and appealed for anybody who may have seen Kimberly to come forward. But they couldn't find any witnesses that progressed the investigation any further. There were no suspects, no physical evidence. The investigation stalled. But not before the killer made another call to 911.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I am so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every day and I can't believe I did a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
Police released the 911 call to the media. It was hoped that somebody would recognise the voice. The media nicknamed him the weepy-voiced killer. The response was overwhelming. Everybody seemed to think the voice matched somebody that they knew. Over 100 names were provided to the police, but unfortunately it all amounted to nothing. The release of the calls got them no closer to identifying a suspect. And with no evidence and no witnesses, the case started getting colder and colder. About 9 months after the murder, on March 19, 1982, there was this news report from KSTP Eyewitness News. Police thought they may have had a breakthrough.
Locally tonight, St. Paul police are disappointed. They thought they were close to solving one of the city's murders, but new information has sent the police back to square one in the murder case of Kimberly Compton. That information came to light when police took a rare step and opened their files to the media. Lindsay Strand has more on the story.
Retired St. Paul detective Earl Mills returned to the force for one day this week to open the files of his 7-month investigation to the media. He said he was convinced information received 4 days after he retired last February answered the question of who killed Kimberly Compton. Mills believed it was Alan Lopez, indicted for killing his parents and sister at their St. Paul home last August. Found mentally incompetent to stand trial, Lopez was sent to the State Security Hospital in St. Peter, where he committed suicide before police could talk to him. But while barricaded inside his family's house last summer, he had confessed to killing Compton. Police, however, had ruled him out as a suspect because they linked the Compton murder to another case they didn't believe Lopez could have committed. The link was in taped telephone calls to police. Kimberly Compton's body was discovered last June along an unfinished portion of 35E, only 3.5 hours after she arrived in town by bus.
The report then plays the 911 voice recordings relating to Kimberly Compton's murder. They then link the case to the attempted murder of Karen Potak and play that 911 recording. The news report then continues.
Arriving at the location the caller described, police found Karen Potak, badly beaten but still alive. Police didn't think Lopez could have committed the attack because they thought he was in the Anoka State Hospital that night. But just 5 weeks ago, Mills learned that Lopez was granted a pass to leave the hospital the day Potak was assaulted, and that information made him confident Lopez attacked both women.
Based on the telephone calls we received, his vicious nature with his family, the fact that he was not in an institution, public institution at the time of either of the cases.
But information obtained by the media and the new investigator on the case has shattered Mills' theory. One phone call to the Ramsey County Jail determined that while Lopez may have been out of the state hospital the night that Potak was attacked, he was in the Ramsey County Jail the night Kimberly Compton was murdered, clearly ruling him out as a suspect in the case and sending police back to square one in their investigation. Police Chief William McCutcheon refused to comment directly on the quality of the investigation, but said the quality of future investigations should be improved by a recent departmental reorganization. Lindsay Strand, Channel 5 Eyewitness News, St. Paul.
And square one of the investigation is exactly where police remained. As the months went on, new cases came in and Kimberly's case got less and less attention before it was eventually placed on the cold case shelf, where it was barely touched. On the 6th of August 1982, 40-year-old Barbara Simons was having a night out at the Hexagon Bar in Minneapolis. Barbara was having fun up on the dance floor, dancing and drinking with a man she had just met that night. At one point when she was ordering a drink, she mentioned to the waitress that she hoped the man she had met was a nice guy, because he was going to give her a ride home. Later that night, the waitress saw them leaving the bar together. And then another phone call was made to 911.
Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one. Oh, my safe. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm going to kill myself. I'm sick.
Where are you?
I'm just going to... If somebody dies with a hook shit on, it's me. I killed all day. I'm sorry. I'll never make it to heaven.
Police later located the body of Barbara Simons caught on the underbrush down an embankment of the Mississippi River in Minneapolis. The killer had tried to dispose of her body in the river, but the underbrush stopped that from happening. Barbara had been stabbed around 100 times. It was evident there was now a serial killer at work. Police traced Barbara's movements on the night of her death, and that eventually led them back to the Hexagon Bar and to an interview with a waitress who saw her dancing with an unknown man. Police showed the waitress several mug books in the hopes she would be able to identify the man she saw Barbara with. The waitress looked through over 100 photos before the police were in luck. She picked out the man she saw with Barbara. This was a huge break in the investigation. Police immediately organised for a surveillance team to closely follow their new suspect. Soon after, on the 20th of August 1982, 19-year-old prostitute Denise Williams was working the red light district of Minneapolis. Denise had been a prostitute since she was 13 years old. A car pulled up to Denise. The male driver started chatting to her and they came to an agreement. The male offered her $100 to have some fun. But he only had $40 on him at the time. He promised to pay her the other $60 later. Denise agreed and got into his car. They went back to his apartment in St. Paul where they had sex. It was over very quickly and Denise started wondering if the man was going to want more. But he didn't, and he offered to drive Denise back to her corner. On the way back to the red light district, the man veered off the main road and started taking some back streets. The man said he was taking a shortcut. But Denise started to get uneasy. She knew the area and knew this wasn't a shortcut. She started to look around for a weapon and was in luck when she spotted a bottle close by. Denise decided that if the man tried anything, she would whack him in the head with the bottle. The man pulled into a dark, dead-end parking lot near Coolidge Avenue in Minneapolis. There was no street lighting at all. When they stopped, the man said to Denise, "Arse, grass or gas. No one rides for free." Denise tried to get out of the car, but the man grabbed her left arm and then stabbed her in the stomach with a screwdriver. Denise reacted by hitting him in the head with the glass bottle, causing it to smash. She hit him a few more times with a broken bottle. He started bleeding everywhere. He was cut up pretty bad on the cheek, head and hand. But that didn't stop him. He kept trying to stab Denise over and over again. She reacted by trying to punch, kick and bite him. She fought as fiercely as she could. Denise eventually managed to open the door and fell out onto the ground. The male fell on top of her. Denise decided to change tactics and she stopped fighting altogether. She played dead. She said, I'm dying," and lay completely still. But that didn't work. The man kept stabbing her. Denise screamed for help, and a nearby resident, Douglas Panning, heard her screams. He made his way outside and saw the attacker on top of Denise, still stabbing her. Panning ran up and grabbed him. The attacker jumped up and then immediately swung the screwdriver at Panning. Panning ran away, but the attacker gave chase. Luckily, Panning was able to make his way back inside his unit and called the police. The attacker gave up, jumped back into his car and drove off. He was badly cut up and injured. Panning went back outside to help Denise. Denise had been stabbed 15 times. She had wounds on her chest, abdomen and head, as well as a punctured lung and a punctured liver. She was rushed to hospital where she had emergency surgery. Despite being badly hurt, Denise survived the attack. Denise initially gave her name as Mary, as she was aware there was a warrant out for her arrest for a probation violation. She also told the police she had been hitchhiking when she was attacked. But Denise later came clean and told the truth. That same night, shortly after the attack on Denise, another call was made to 911.
We need an ambulance.
Where?
1505 Westminster.
1505
Yes,
Westminster. What's the problem?
I'm all cut up. I got beat up.
What's your apartment number?
208, I'm bleeding.
208. Where are you bleeding from?
From my arm, my face, my head.
Paramedics were dispatched to the address. Police were called as well. There they found 37-year-old Paul Stefani, the man picked out in the mug book by the waitress at the Hexagon bar, the man who police had a surveillance operation on. But earlier that night, just before making his way to the red light district, Stefani had lost the police tail, leaving him free to attack Denise Williams. Luckily, she survived. Stefani was arrested, and Denise easily picked him out as her attacker from the mugshots. Stefani was charged with her attempted murder. Paul Stefani was born on the 8th of September 1944 and grew up in Austin, Minnesota. He was brought up in a deeply religious household. He had a history of psychiatric problems and one previous conviction for aggravated assault, which is why his photo was in the mug book. He worked as a janitor and lived by himself. In March 1977, Stefani was fired from his job at the Malmberg manufacturing plant, so he was familiar with the area where Karen Potak was attacked and was well aware how quiet and isolated the spot would be at night. Police interviewed him about the attack on Karen Potak and the murders of Kimberly Compton and Barbara Simons. They showed him crime scene photos from all three attacks. Stefani looked at them and said, "You're not going to pin those on me." He denied any involvement in the crimes and denied being the weepy voice killer. Along with the attempted murder of Denise Williams, Stefani was charged with the murder of Barbara Simons. These attacks occurred in Minneapolis, a different jurisdiction to the attacks on Karen Potak and Kimberly Compton. Those happened in St. Paul. Stefani pled not guilty to the murder of Barbara Simons, and the 6-week trial commenced in February 1985. The prosecution case relied on matching the 911 calls made after Barbara Simons' attack and after Denise Williams' attack to the voice of Stefani. An audio interview conducted with Stefani shortly after his arrest was used to try and make the match. The experts that were called in concluded that the voice of Stefani was remarkably similar to the 911 calls, but they could not conclusively say they were an exact match. That's when Stefani's sister was called to the stand to testify. She listened to the 911 tapes. She then bowed her head and said that she had no doubt those calls were made by her brother. After a 6-week trial, Stefani was eventually found guilty and sentenced to 40 years in jail for the murder of Simons. Stefani also pled not guilty to the attempted murder of Denise Williams. That also went to trial, but he was eventually convicted and sentenced to 18 years in jail. So with these results, you're now thinking that prosecutors in the jurisdiction of St. Paul would jump on board and get to work charging Stefani for the attempted murder of Karen Potak and the murder of Kimberly Compton. Well, you're wrong. Prosecutors stated the voice evidence was not enough and they were unable to pursue a conviction against Stefani for those attacks. Instead, they elected to leave them officially unsolved, giving Karen and the family of Kimberly no closure. In 1997, 12 years later, Stefani got in contact with the St. Paul police. He had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he wanted to talk to somebody and clear the slate. St. Paul police went and met up with Stefani and conducted an interview with him. He confessed to the attempted murder of Karen Potak.
She got in my car and I gave him my javelin until I said, he'll be out in a minute. I tried to clean some of the ice off the windshield.
Do you remember where you hit her with the tire iron saw? Did you hit her 1 time, 2 times?
Nothing about 30 times. I mean, I would hook 20 times, I think.
Were you swinging it this way, or did you poke her with it?
I don't think I poked her, no. I remember it hitting her mainly on the forehead, on the cheek, and the jaw, the mouth, and the top of the head. I think it was only about 10 times, because then I know she must really be hurting in that, steel bar like that. I was even hurt. When I went back to the car, I was going like this. I mean, and that's when I maybe want to go to the phone. I mean, I really wanted to help her. My mind started tearing up. What are you doing? You had a chance to make another friend, I kept yelling at myself. You like to make friends.
And to the murder of Kimberly Compton.
And then that's when she started telling me where she was from, in Wisconsin and all. And then says, hey, why don't you, I'm not even thinking about hurting her right now. I said, hey, why don't you let me show you around town? I said, yeah, I want to show you something. There's really a nice view over here, and you can see the nice river. I think I met somebody you can probably have something to tell your parents about then. So as I walked out of the car, I carried my knife with me. I had every intention of hurting her. We lay down in the grass, and I remember opening up a bra and just feeling it. And they just started stabbing me.
Detectives got a shock when Stefani confessed to another murder that he wasn't even on the radar for. 33-year-old Kathleen Greening was drowned in a bathtub at her home on the 21st of July 1982, only a few weeks before the murder of Barbara Simons.
You say that you both got into the tub?
Yes.
And you're positive about that?
Yes. Because, I mean, I remember when I pushed her head under water, I could see her face.
Did you push her in by her, push her head down, or did you push her in the chest area under the water?
I held her shoulders down.
You held her shoulders down? Both hands then?
Detectives found the cold case file for Kathleen Greening's murder. Going through the file, they found an address book belonging to her that had been taken as evidence. In the book was the name Paul S., with a telephone number. They matched that telephone number to the one Stefani gave the night he was arrested for Denise Williams' attack. It never came out what their relation was prior to the attack, or why his number was in her address book. But finally, justice had been done for Karen Patak, Kimberly Compton, and now Kathleen Greening. The prosecutor who secured the conviction for the murder of Barbara Simons doesn't believe Stefani enjoyed or relished in committing murder. He felt guilty for what he had done and wanted to be stopped. That's why he made the 911 calls. But he couldn't stop himself. And when he was eventually caught, he couldn't even admit to what he had done. In Stefani's words, killing seemed to be the thing you were supposed to do that was part of life. Until he actually did it.
Killing seemed to be the thing you were supposed to do. That was part of life. Driving the car was part of life. Eating food was part of life. To me, it seemed like killing was part of life. Until I did it, and then I drove away, and then I looked like the one on Pierce Better Road. What are you doing? And then I just couldn't turn myself in. That's why I kept getting on the phone. Will you catch me and stop me? Or catch me or something like that.
Between 1980 and 1985, a series of crimes gripped Sydney with fear. Justice David Opus was shot dead outside his home. A bomb exploded outside of Justice Richard G's house, causing significant damage. A bomb was triggered at Justice Ray Watson's house when his wife Pearl opened the front door, killing her instantly. All three were family law court judges. Then there was the bombing of the Parramatta Family Law Court itself, and the attempted assassination of solicitor Gary Watts. But what was the connection between those attacks and the shooting death of 25-year-old surfie Stephen Blanchard, and the bombing of a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, killing Jehovah's Witness member Graham Wykes and seriously injuring many others? For years, police worked hard to crack the case known as the Family Court Murders, some of the most serious offences ever committed in Australia. Never before had judges or the courts themselves been under attack. But despite their best efforts, nobody was ever charged. A vicious, ruthless killer was left free to roam the streets. On the 5th of January 1976, a new court opened its doors in Australia. Designed as a revolutionary new court to deal with divorce and all of the things that came with it, property settlements, child custody and maintenance. It was the Family Law Court of Australia, also known as the No-Fault Divorce Court. Prior to the Family Law Court, couples needed a reason to file a divorce. Some of these included insanity, cruelty, desertion, and probably the most common, adultery. And divorce proceedings were full open court hearings. Private and at times embarrassing information was aired out in open court for anyone to hear. Hearings were traumatic and cross-examinations were often deeply personal. The No-Fault Divorce Court was designed to fix all of that. Matters would be heard in private with little formalities. And when the doors of the new court opened, people came from everywhere to get out of their unhappy marriages. No longer did people have to hire private detectives to catch their partners committing adultery. No longer did women have to try and prove to a judge that they'd been beaten by their husband. No longer did anyone need a specific reason to get a divorce. But as popular as the new court was, it wasn't without its problems. The family court dealt with highly emotional, highly charged people. It wasn't uncommon for things to turn heated, and at times verbal threats turned into physical violence. The court also left a long line of very upset and angry men who believed the newly formed court heavily favoured women. A lot of custody decisions did actually favour women, and not only that, many men were left furious when judges awarded their ex-wives half of their house, sometimes more, and ordered the men to pay maintenance. It was a perceived injustice for them. They were the ones that worked. Why should their ex-wives be entitled to anything? In 1979, a couple going through a divorce proceeding put their name down to be heard at the family law court. Andrea Blanchard and Len Warwick. Andrea Blanchard met her husband, Len Warwick, on a blind date in 1970. Andrea was 18 years old at the time. She was instantly attracted to Len. They started dating, going out for dinner, going to the movies, and spending a lot of time together. As happy as Andrea was with Len, it didn't take long for a bit of a dark side to emerge. Len had a vicious jealous streak and was extremely possessive. He started unexpectedly dropping in on Andrea at work to check up on her. Andrea couldn't cope with his growing possessiveness and broke the relationship off. But they got back together soon after. The relationship went on and off for a little while before Len took Andrea into a jewellery shop and told her to pick an engagement ring. Andrea was ecstatic. After they became engaged, Len only became more possessive. He started to display dark mood swings. He would aggressively snap without warning, and he got more and more controlling. They got married in 1974. There was a small wedding reception. Only 13 people. Len had no friends attend. Once married, Len told Andrea she was no longer allowed to speak to her family, and he banned visitors from attending the house. It wasn't long before Andrea says she started to suffer terrible physical violence at the hands of Len. She says he attacked her violently, leaving her battered and bruised. By mid-1975, Andrea escaped Len and moved in with her father at Revesby. But Len was having none of it. He broke in, climbing through the kitchen window. He had a confrontation with Andrea's father, but he ended up leaving before anything physical happened. After that incident, Andrea got a restraining order against Len. But a week after getting the order, she returned back to him and her violent marriage. When Andrea fell pregnant, she says things didn't get any better, and they only got worse. She says Len continued to beat her up, and at times he would hold her prisoner, keeping her locked in the house. Their daughter Trudy was born in 1978. The domestic violence didn't stop. In 1979, after a particularly vicious assault at the hands of Len, Andrea finally decided enough was enough and left him for good. She moved into her father's house in Revesby, which is in Sydney's southwest. Her brother Stephen Blanchard also lived in the house. This left Len to live in the house he and Andrea had bought together. Len responded to the news by telling Andrea he was going to shoot her father and that she would be next. Len Warwick was born on the 24th of January 1947. His mother died when he was just 6 years old. He grew up on his father's property in Helensburgh, which is a small town about 45 kilometres south of Sydney. It's surrounded by bushland. And it's growing up here that Len developed excellent bush navigational and survival skills. He also became well equipped with firearms, shooting rabbits and pigs. He was described as an excellent shot. In 1967, he was conscripted for national service due to the Vietnam War, but he never saw overseas duty. He was discharged from the army in 1970. After leaving the army, he became a firefighter, joining the New South Wales Fire Brigade. Len wasn't particularly liked by his work colleagues. He was described as a loner who didn't mix well with others. He was arrogant, resentful, and extremely cunning. He was a strong man with a solid build. He had dark, cold eyes. He had no respect for anyone, particularly authority, and his marriage with Andrea had shown he was capable of violence. It was in March 1979 that Andrea lodged an application for full-time custody of Trudy at the newly formed Family Law Court at Parramatta in Sydney's west. Len also made an application for full-time custody. The court issued interim orders until a full hearing could be held. The interim orders granted Andrea full custody of Trudy. Len was granted access twice per week and ordered to pay $20 per week maintenance. Len didn't think too much of these orders. Having no respect for the court, he breached them at every opportunity he could. He would turn up to Andrea's house late at night, outside of his scheduled access times, and demand to see Trudy. and on one occasion when he had access to Trudy, he kept her for several days beyond what the court order specified. Not knowing who to turn to, Andrea enlisted the help of her brother, Stephen Blanchard, to help her get Trudy back. Together they drove to Len's house and knocked on the door. Stephen asked Len to hand Trudy over, saying they weren't there to cause any trouble, they just wanted to abide by the court orders. When Len refused, things got slightly more heated. Stephen pointed out that it wouldn't look favourable in court for him if he was breaching the court orders. Len responded by slamming the door in their face. Eventually, with the help of the family court, Trudy was returned to Andrea. On the 21st of February 1980, Stephen Blanchard finished work at the Revesby Bowling Club. He was 25 years old, still living with his father at their Revesby home, and now with Andrea and Trudy as well. After work, he visited his girlfriend before returning home around midnight. Andrea and Trudy were in bed sound asleep. Their father was away on holidays, so he wasn't home. Stephen quietly made his way to the bedroom at the back of the house and went to sleep. In the early hours of the morning, believed to be between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m, somebody broke into the house. They made their way silently to Stephen's bedroom, where he was by now sound asleep. They stood over his bed, aimed a .22 at him, and shot him. The bullet entered just above Stephen's right eye, killing him instantly. The .22 had a silencer attached. Andrea and Trudy didn't hear a thing. The shooter then wrapped a plastic bag around Stephen's head to contain the bleeding. The shooter then wrapped him up in the doona he was sleeping with, and then quietly carried him out of the house. The next day, the 22nd of February, was Trudy's second birthday. Andrea woke up and wasn't concerned that Stephen wasn't home. It wasn't uncommon for him to spend the night at his girlfriend's place after work. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all until the phone rang. It was Stephen's boss at the Revesby Workers Club. Andrea was surprised to hear Stephen didn't show up for work. Andrea immediately walked to his room. She found his watch and wallet on his bedside table. She had a gut feeling something was wrong. Stephen is very reliable and wouldn't just not turn up for work without calling somebody first. She immediately called the police. Police asked Andrea if she thought anybody would want to harm Stephen. She didn't hesitate to name Len. Of course, it wasn't uncommon for somebody to accuse their ex-partner of all sorts of things. Everybody was concerned and confused over Stephen's sudden disappearance. His friends, family and girlfriend tried frantically to find him, but they had no luck. On the 27th of February 1980, a group of friends were out boating in Jerusalem Bay at Cowan Creek, which is a catchment of the Hawkesbury River in the Ku-ring-gai National Park, which is about 25 kilometres north of Sydney. They saw what they initially thought was a mannequin, but closer inspection revealed they had found a human body. Police were called to retrieve the male victim. There was a length of rope tied around the midsection of the body. The rope was attached to 11 bricks. There was another piece of rope tied around the victim's neck with a garbage bag attached. The victim had been in the water for about a week and had been attacked by what was believed to be a bull shark, common in the area. Whoever had dumped the victim had done their best to make sure he wasn't found, but they hadn't counted on gases causing him to rise to the surface. The 11 bricks tied to him weren't enough to weigh him down for good. The cause of death was immediately obvious. There was a bullet wound above the victim's right eye. Police got to work trying to identify the victim, and they quickly found it was the body of Stephen Blanchard. A murder investigation got underway. It was thought it must have been somebody who knew Stephen and who knew the layout of the house. The rope used was found to be a fireman's rope, officially issued to all firefighters. Andrea had no doubt who was responsible. On the 29th of February, Len Warwick calmly went with police to Revesby Police Station to be questioned. He refused to tell detectives where he was on the night Stephen was killed. He said that police had inconvenienced him by taking him to the police station so they could work it out for themselves. Whilst he was being questioned, other police searched his house. They found a handwritten note with the word rope written on it, but no other evidence was found. It was circumstantial, but it wasn't enough. Police found no physical evidence linking Len to the crime. He wasn't charged. The family law court judge who first heard Andrea and Len's case was Justice David Opus. He granted the initial order that gave Andrea full custody of Trudy, with Len getting access twice a week. He also ordered them both into counselling and wanted to wait to check if any progress could be made with counselling before proceeding any further. Andrea had filed an application for Len to leave their family home. Justice Opus refused that application, but ordered Len to hand over any of Trudy's property that Andrea needed. Len didn't care much for the orders issued by Justice Opus. It was common for him to fail to return Trudy on time and to keep her for days longer than he was supposed to. He also refused to speak with the court counsellor. The counsellor responded by writing a pretty harsh report, very unfavourable to Len, describing his non-compliance of the court orders and his overall poor attitude. Justice Opus wasn't impressed. He told Len he could be charged with contempt of court and that he could be sent to jail if he continued to ignore the court orders. He also suspended Len's access visits with Trudy for a period of time. Judge Opus set another court date for the 18th of July 1980. The property settlement, the maintenance payments, and custody of Trudy would all be addressed again on that day. On the 23rd of June 1980, Justice Opus arrived home from work, just before 7 p.m. He lived in Wallara, in Sydney's eastern suburbs. As Justice Opus was sitting at the dinner table, eating with his wife and children, the doorbell rang. Justice Opus got up from the table to open the door. A fire alarm was going off next door. It was quite loud. As soon as Justice Opus opened the door, he was shot in the stomach by a .22 caliber rifle. His wife, wondering what was taking so long, walked out to see what was going on when she found him lying on the ground. He was completely unresponsive. Police and ambulance were called and Justice Opus was rushed to hospital, but they couldn't save him. He was pronounced dead a few hours later. The fire alarm had drowned out the shot of the rifle. The Opus house was on the market for sale at the time. Just before Justice Opus was shot, a small bomb had gone off in a grate opposite a real estate agent's house in the nearby suburb of Rose Bay. The real estate agent was looking after the sale of the Opus house. The bomb didn't injure anyone, but it tied up a considerable amount of emergency services and actually caused a delay in their response time to the Opus shooting. That, combined with the fire alarm sounding loudly next door to the Opus house, completely drowning out the gunshot, were possible diversions created by the shooter. A murder investigation commenced. David's wife has no doubt he was killed because of his role in the family law court. Police learnt that there was a lot of disgruntled males who had cases heard before Judge Opus. They didn't think too fondly of him. He usually awarded custody to the mother of the children. It was the first murder of a sitting judge in Australia. A ripple of fear went through judges and court staff everywhere. A $100,000 reward was offered. A pardon was even awarded to anyone who may have been an accomplice of the crime, but who didn't actually commit it, if they came forward with information. Police did locate a number of witnesses who saw a male person running from the scene, carrying something in his hand. They got sketches made up based off their descriptions. Police started interviewing people who had cases heard before Judge Opus and who may have had a grudge against him. One of those people was Len Warwick. When Len's solicitor learnt that police wanted to interview him, he unbelievably advised them to go and see him at work at the fire station, as he kept firearms at home that he could use against police. On the 9th of August, police interviewed Len. They searched his home but found no evidence. They seized his firearms, but none of them matched the murder weapon. Len again refused to answer any questions. He denied having anything to do with the murder, but he refused to give his whereabouts on the night that it happened. Len was still the prime suspect for Stephen Blanchard's murder, who of course was also shot with a .22. Police wanted to get Len's fingerprints on file, just in case some evidence came up later that they could match to. But they couldn't do this without charging him. During the search of his home, they found toilet paper belonging to the New South Wales Fire Brigade that Len had stolen from work. They charged him for theft, which allowed them to take a mugshot and get his fingerprints. They found that Len had finished work at 6 p.m. the night Justice Opus was shot, giving him enough time to get to Wallara and commit the crime. But again, they had no evidence, and Len was not uttering a word. Detectives were frustrated, but they had no choice but to let him go. They had nothing. The investigation continued, but police turned up no solid evidence linking anyone to the crime. They believed the motive was related to a family law case, but Justice Opus had heard hundreds of cases. It could be anyone. In July 1982, coronial inquests were held into the murders of Stephen Blanchard and Justice Opus. The inquest for Justice Opus was held first. Len Warwick was summoned to appear at the inquest. He was the last witness called to give evidence. Len was asked to state his name, address, and occupation. He answered those questions, but refused to answer any more. Many questions were asked of him, but each time Len gave the same dead stare, saying coldly, "On the advice of my senior counsel, I will not answer any further questions." At the conclusion of the inquest, the coroner ruled there is no doubt Justice David Opus was murdered, but said there was no evidence to indicate who did the shooting. The coroner said he had no doubt his death was brought about by the fact he was a family court judge and that the shooting was directly related to a case he had presided over. Immediately following the inquest for Justice Opus, the inquest into Stephen Blanchard's murder was heard. Again, Len was called to the stand. Again, numerous questions were asked of him, but he didn't answer a single one of them, on the grounds it may incriminate him. The coroner was extremely frustrated at this point and even directed Len to answer some of the questions. Questions that there was no way the answer could incriminate him, such as, "Was Stephen Blanchard your brother-in-law?" But despite being directed to answer, Len still refused. He maintained his right to silence. They contemplated charging him with obstructing the course of justice, but they didn't. Len had a right to silence, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. The coroner ruled Stephen Blanchard was murdered by an unknown person. There was insufficient evidence to name a person as being responsible. Justice Richard G. had only just been appointed his position of family court judge when he inherited the cases of Justice Opus, including Andrea and Len's case. They first appeared before Justice G in October 1980. They made numerous appearances before him from that date on. In April 1981, Justice G ruled that their family home had to be sold, and the money was to be divided equally between Len and Andrea. Len again failed to comply with the court order. He remained living in the house. So it went back before the courts to try and get the orders actually enforced. Justice G restricted access times for Len to see Trudy as punishment for not complying. Len then started failing to appear before the court altogether. He also started to actively avoid service of any court papers. This cat and mouse game of defying court orders and service of court papers went on for years. In January 1984, Len kept Trudy for 10 days over his access time. By this time, Justice G had had enough of Len. He issued a warrant allowing state and federal police to recover Trudy and return her to Andrea. That was enough to make Len comply, and he gave Trudy back to Andrea. But the games continued. He failed to appear at court again the next month. He even locked himself in a room at the fire station he worked at to avoid service of court documents. Justice G set another court hearing date on the 6th of March 1984. Between the 24th of February 1984 and the 27th of February 1984, a quarry was broken into at Prospect in Sydney. Explosives, fuses and detonators were stolen. About 1:30 a.m. on the 6th of March 1984, a bomb exploded on the front veranda of Justice G's house. Justice G and his family were asleep inside. The bomber had attended under the cover of darkness, set the bomb on the front veranda, lit the fuse, and then ran off. The explosion was huge, nearly destroying Justice G's home completely. It was reduced to rubble in most places. Neighbours' homes were damaged as well, such was the force of the blast. Justice G was seriously injured and rushed to hospital. It was a miracle nobody was killed. Len and Andrea were due to appear before Justice G later that day. Obviously, Justice G couldn't attend court. He was being treated in hospital. Len didn't bother showing up to court either. The matter was decided in Len's absence by another judge who filled in, Justice Ray Watson. 4 years after the murder of Justice Opus, police feared the same attacker had struck again. It was a different MO, but there was no doubt it was a deliberate, premeditated attack against a judge. Police investigate the family court connection again. They believe the attack must have been committed by somebody extremely distressed and angered over a decision by the court, which left the obvious problem. Nearly every case heard by the family court left somebody distressed and angered. Once again, police looked for suspects with motive and opportunity, and once again the name Len Warwick appeared. On the 16th of March, Len was interviewed by detectives about the bombing. It went the same way as all the other interviews had. Other than basic details such as stating his name, he refused to answer any questions, including providing his whereabouts on the night of the bombing. His roster showed he wasn't on duty that night. On the 14th of April 1984, roughly 5 weeks after the bombing at the home of Justice G, a caretaker was performing the last of his nightly checks at the family law court in Parramatta. The place was deserted other than him. Happy everything was in order, the caretaker left the courthouse at about 10:20 p.m. Not long after the caretaker left, a massive bomb exploded at the entrance of the court, destroying the front of the building. There was now no doubt. There was a madman targeting the family law court and its judges. The court system as a whole was under attack. But could it have been worse? Was the bomb really supposed to go off late at night when nobody was around? Or had the bomber intended it to go off the next morning when the place would have been filled with judges, lawyers and court staff? Fear now struck the hearts of everyone from judges down to the cleaners of the courthouse. 3 attacks had now been committed. Most felt it was only a matter of time before the next one. Never before had the courts been put under attack in Australia. Again, police based their investigation on the idea that somebody angered and disgruntled with the result of the family law court was responsible. And again, Len Warwick's name popped up. He and Andrea were due back in court the day after the bombing, the 15th of April. A check of his roster revealed he wasn't working the night of the bombing. But when police went to question him, he again didn't utter a word. Despite being their number one suspect, police again find zero evidence to link Len to the crime. In the morning of the 4th of July 1984, Justice Ray Watson, who was now looking after Len and Andrea's case, was at home getting ready for work. He lived in Sydney's lower North Shore. His wife Pearl was home with him. Shortly after 8 a.m, Pearl opened the front door of their house. When she opened the door, she triggered a bomb. The massive explosion killed her instantly. Justice Watson survived but suffered shrapnel wounds. The blast was huge, and just like the blast at Justice G's home, neighbouring houses also suffered damage. Neighbours and pedestrians who were walking past suffered cuts and injuries from the debris. Another attack on the family court. Another attack on a judge presiding over Len and Andrea's case. Police went to speak with Len that night, but got the usual wall of silence. They tried to interview him a second time later that month, but again they got the usual response. The latest attack caused the formation of a joint federal and state task force to investigate the case. It was also announced that all family law court judges, their families, and all family law courts would have 24-hour surveillance until the case was solved. The family court murders was one of the largest murder investigations in Australia's history. 50 detectives worked full-time on the case for 2 years. Hundreds of suspects were looked at and eliminated. As the task force eliminated hundreds of suspects and started narrowing down the list, one person stood out. The only person that police can link to all of the victims, including Stephen Blanchard. Whilst there was no direct evidence linking Len to any of the crimes, the circumstantial evidence was starting to build. The reward had been bumped up from $100,000 to $500,000. Apart from Len, there were other suspects that police looked at. There was 62-year-old Italian immigrant Silvano Mariti, who was just going through a divorce proceeding at the time. He and his wife had 2 children together. Silvano was highly educated with a degree in chemistry. He was a lieutenant in the Italian army in World War II and migrated to Australia after the war. He owned a construction company that built units, and Justice Ray Watson had purchased a unit off him. Silvano's divorce proceedings were being held at Parramatta Family Court. Silvano had very little respect for the court. He appeared before Justice Watson and was ordered not to leave Sydney with his children when he had an access visit. He defied the court order and was later arrested and ended up doing jail time for contempt of court. Silvano developed a hatred of Justice Watson after that. He self-published pamphlets in 1979 that he had handed out around Sydney. The pamphlets were extremely menacing. He made a threat: "I will kill my children and Justice Watson, and there will be blood running down the steps of the family court." He had no alibi for the Justice Opus murder. He was also scheduled to appear before Justice G once, but he got stuck in traffic and was running late, so Justice G dismissed his application that day. Silvano was far from impressed. He had no alibi for the night the bomb went off at Justice G's house either, and no alibi for the night the bomb went off at the Parramatta Family Court. He actually boasted to people that he had a better knowledge than most about bombs. As good as he looked, he had no link to Stephen Blanchard, and he was eventually ruled out. 52-year-old John Loudon was another suspect. He was very bitter and outspoken against the Family Law Court. He was a founding member of the Family Law Court Action Group, known as FLAG. He came to attention as during a FLAG meeting held only hours before the Parramatta Court bombing, he said to the other members, "It won't be long before one of the family law courts is bombed." Not long after the bombing at Justice Watson's house, he actually gave a media interview saying the only way the injustice of the family law court can be changed was through violence. He also had a knowledge of explosives. And as they dug deeper, they found a private detective who claimed that Loudon had hired him to get back $10,000 that he had paid the 2 men to kill his former wife, a job that was never completed. That particular allegation was never proven, but Loudon was later charged for paying $3,000 to somebody to blind his former father-in-law with acid. As good as Loudon looked, he never actually appeared before any of the family court judges who were attacked. He also had an alibi for each night an attack occurred. He was ruled out. That left one major suspect. The fallout from the attacks affected staffing numbers at the family court. Some court staff quit, and others just didn't turn up for work. There was a serious staff shortage. When an offer was put out for people to work at the family court from other courts in Sydney, only one person put their hand up. The general feeling was, who's going to be next? The investigation continued, but no arrests were made. On the 9th of February 1985, Len attended Andrea's house, banging on her front door, demanding to see Trudy. Andrea told Len that her solicitor, Gary Watts, advised her that he was not to see Trudy on unscheduled visits. Len couldn't control his rage. He violently attacked Andrea. At 8 a.m. the next day, Peter Tall walked outside his Northmead house. He needed to do some work on his car that was parked in the driveway. He popped the bonnet and was frozen with fear at what he saw. A bomb. The car would have been blown to pieces if the ignition was started. Anyone inside it would have been killed, as well as anyone standing nearby. Peter Tall had recently moved into the Northmead house. He was renting it off the new owner. The new owner had only just purchased the house off solicitor Gary Watts. Gary Watts was still listed in the phone book as living at the Northmead address. When Gary Watts heard of the failed attack, he immediately stood down from representing Andrea. After the bombing attempt on Andrea's solicitor, Len was of course questioned again by police. Police searched his house but found nothing. Len just smirked at them when they asked about his whereabouts the night of the attempt. Andrea had already made the decision to leave Sydney. Her plan went into action even quicker when she heard of the failed assassination of her solicitor. Andrea contacted her sister Judy for help. Judy was a recently baptised member of the Jehovah's Witness, turning to the faith after being devastated by the murder of her brother, Stephen Blanchard. Andrea had also attended a few meetings with Judy and even took Trudy with her a few times. Len knew they had attended the Jehovah's Witness church and was far from impressed. On one access visit, he questioned Trudy about what she did there. When Andrea went to pick Trudy up after his access visit, Len said to her, "Don't get involved with the Jehovah's, or I'm warning you, you'll be in big trouble." Judy enlisted the help of her friends and fellow members of the Casefile Jehovah's Witness community to help her and Andrea move out of Sydney, and they were only too happy to help. After Judy, Andrea and Trudy had left Sydney, a number of members of the Casefile Jehovah's Witness Church started receiving menacing phone calls. A male person was demanding to know where their former church member Judy had gone. None of the people called were able to help with an address, although one of them did mention she thought that Judy had moved to the central coast of New South Wales. On the 14th of July 1985, a congregation was held at the Casefile Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall. When the members arrived, they found a smashed window and some blood. Whoever had broken in had obviously cut themselves. A check revealed nothing was stolen, and the members believed that local hoodlums were to blame. 1 week later, on the 21st of July 1985, the Casefile Jehovah's Witness community again gathered for a congregation at their hall. Again, they turned up to find a window had been smashed. They put it down to hoodlums again. Nothing was found to be stolen, and the congregation got underway. Men and women of all ages, as well as children of all ages, were present at the hall when the bomb exploded. Graham Wykes, who was leading the service, was killed. Over 70 people in total were injured. 14 were seriously injured and had to be taken to hospital. Some had critical injuries. 6 people in total required surgery, including a 3-month-old baby. The scene was one of complete devastation. It looked like a war zone. Men, women and children injured and scattered everywhere. As tragic as it still was, it was a miracle only one person was killed. The hall was a complete wreck. When some emergency services arrived on the scene, they were of the opinion that there couldn't possibly be any survivors, such was the extent of the damage. The community was shocked. Somebody had just bombed a church congregation. Who could possibly do such a thing? Police initially struggled to come up with a motive. But when Judy and Andrea had heard of the bombing, they had no doubt who was responsible. The investigation into the bombing revealed that the reason a lot more people didn't die was due to the poor construction of the hall. Had it been built better, who knows what the death toll could have been. This time the bomb was set off by an electric detonator, activated by a mechanically timed delay. Components in the device were matched to the unexploded bomb at Northmead and to the Justice Watson bomb. Police later learnt that Len Warwick had turned up to work with cuts on his face on the 15th of July 1985, the day after the Jehovah's Witness hall was broken into, the first time when the blood was left. On the 30th of July, 9 days after the Jehovah's Witness explosion, an eviction notice was finally served on Len by police. The eviction notice forced him out of the house, which was then to be auctioned and the proceeds divided equally between himself and Andrea. While serving the notice, police asked him about the Jehovah's Witness bombing. He gave his usual response, which was no response. Police searched his home and found a list of names written down. It was a list of Jehovah's Witness members' names, complete with their addresses and telephone numbers. They were all from the Central Coast congregation of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Police took Len to the police station. He refused to give a blood sample. He also refused to be interviewed. Instead, he demanded that police tell him where his daughter was. When the police refused, Len had this to say. You are conspiring with the Jehovah's Witnesses and my wife, or should I say my ex-wife, to hide my child. No lacerations were observed, but it was now close to 3 weeks since the hall was first broken into and the blood was left. More than enough time for lacerations to heal. Again, police had found no direct evidence against Len. But here is a recap of what has happened so far. His brother-in-law, Stephen Blanchard, was shot dead shortly after having an altercation with Len about giving Trudy back to Andrea. Justice Opus was shot dead shortly after restricting Len's access to Trudy. Justice G's house was bombed on the morning he was due to make a ruling on Andrea and Len's case. Justice Watson's house was bombed, killing his wife Pearl. Justice Watson was the one who ended up ruling on Len and Andrea's case in the absence of Justice G. The Parramatta Family Court, where all of Len's family law court matters were being heard, was bombed. The attempted assassination of Andrea's solicitor at Northmead. The Jehovah's Witness hall bombing, the people Len believes are helping to hide his wife and daughter. And there was one more thing. The forensic testing of the blood found at the Jehovah's Witness hall had now been completed. The blood type was O positive, the same as Len Warwick, as listed on his army service records. DNA testing didn't exist at the time, but they could check blood types. When police laid out all of these coincidences to Len, he just stared at them and wanted to know what was going to happen to all of his furniture that was still in the house. On the 23rd of July 1985, convinced Len was definitely their man, police put an electronic tracking device on his car. He was also followed by surveillance police. Len had started to ask about 2 of the detectives on the case, Detective Woods and Detective Gersbach. He was trying to find out where they lived. Whilst he was under police surveillance, they observed Len standing in a park opposite police headquarters, just staring at the building for hours. Len knew he was being watched. He started playing games with police. In the middle of the night, he would walk outside with his bicycle, put it in his car to make it look like he was going out somewhere, but then he would go back inside and not go anywhere. When he was driving, he would accelerate harshly, then brake suddenly to a stop, forcing surveillance cars to drive past him. On other occasions, he would walk up to the surveillance cars, knock on the window, and offer the police officers coffee. Len was extremely confident. He didn't seem to care at all that he was being followed. Another search warrant was carried out on Len's house and car, but again the police found nothing. Andrea was sure Len was responsible for all of the attacks. She started to wonder that if she let Trudy live with him, would the attacks stop, saving more innocent people from being hurt. Eventually, with great difficulty and hesitation, she reluctantly made the tough decision to let Trudy live with Len. She gave him full custody. It was her hope that by doing this, nobody else would get hurt. Trudy was 7 years old at the time. On the 9th of April 1986, a coronial inquest was held into the Jehovah's Witness bombing. Len was subpoenaed but again refused to answer any questions. He gave the same answer to every question asked of him. On the advice of my senior counsel, I will not answer that question on the grounds of self-incrimination. Police named Len as their number 1 suspect for the Jehovah's Witness bombing and all of the other attacks. Len's barrister applied to have Len's name suppressed from the public, but that request was denied. At the end of the inquest, police hoped that the coroner would refer the case to the DPP to consider charges against Len. But the coroner ruled, there is no evidence to put him at the scenes of any of the attacks, or that he possessed explosives, or knew how to construct a time bomb. There is no evidence that he ever threatened to kill anyone or destroy a building, apart from a few enigmatic remarks to his former wife. Descriptions of people seen in the area do not match Warwick. The responsible person, or persons, have been attended by the most amazing good fortune and have shown extraordinary strength of will in apparently refraining from the pleasure of boasting success. The result is that these cruel and horrifying crimes have been committed with impunity. The detectives involved in the case could hardly hide their disgust at the ruling. The media ran wild with stories about the man police had named as their number 1 suspect. the media broadcasters engaged in a bidding war to get an exclusive interview with Len. Channel 7 won the battle. It's rumoured they paid Len around $30,000 for the interview.
But it's probably an offbeat question, but what about a lie detector test? Would you undertake one on this issue?
I'd always understood that lie detectors were not legal in this state.
I'm not saying we'd break the law. I'm just asking you, would you be prepared to undertake one in this state or elsewhere?
Presumably evidence gained that way would not be admissible.
The question is, would you agree to undertake a lie detector test?
Well, as the evidence would not be acceptable, I don't really see that there'd be any point in that.
So your answer is?
What my answer was?
Yes or no?
That I wouldn't know for the aforementioned reasons.
How do you live, Mr. Warwick, with the knowledge that you're suspected of some of the most violent crimes in this country's history? You're the prime suspect.
How do I live with that? Well, I have to put up with that, I suppose. It really doesn't make much difference to my normal everyday life. It doesn't seem to make any difference to my friends, the people who know me.
Can you honestly say that you're accused of these serious things? You're a suspect of killings and it doesn't affect you? Surely humans are affected by such criticism.
Well, I suppose I've got used to it, Terry.
Did you have any reasons to be angry at Judge Opus?
No, I don't think so.
Did he preside over the early part of your divorce?
He did, yes.
Did you shoot him?
No.
Did you have any knowledge of it?
No, not at all.
You had no idea that might happen to him?
No.
Had Judge G ordered you to hand over your daughter to your former wife during the divorce?
I'm not too sure.
The bombing of the Jehovah's Witness Hall, the same church, the same congregation which offered your wife sanctuary. A lot of coincidences, isn't it, connecting with you?
Well, I now know about the activities of the Jehovah's Witnesses in relation to the hiding of my daughter. I didn't know that at the time.
What sort of a person do you think would want to kill a family court judge?
A person that was probably disturbed, very upset at the result of some family court hearing.
Have you ever been upset at a decision against you in the family court?
Not quite that upset, Terry.
In 1987, another coronial inquest was held, this time into the bombing death of Pearl Watson. It was much of the same. Len was called to the stand, and Len refused to answer any questions. But of course, he didn't have to. He did have the right to silence. He didn't have to prove he was innocent. The police had to prove he was guilty. This time though, the coroner commented that Len Warwick is the only person who could be said to have a grudge or motive against all of the individuals and organisations that had been targeted. He also mentioned the shifts he worked as a firefighter gave him opportunity to have committed all of the crimes. He said, in his case, the coincidence of motive and opportunity are quite extraordinary. But he went on to say, on the other hand, there was no evidence that Mr. Warwick had ever possessed an explosive, no evidence that he knew how to construct a bomb, and no evidence that he had ever been seen at the site of any of the crimes. Nor was there any evidence that he was in contact with any person who might have the capacity to arrange or to carry out these savage acts. The coroner also wasn't allowed to draw any conclusions from Len's refusal to answer questions. The coroner ruled he was unable to say who was responsible. Yet more disappointment for the victims. At the conclusion of the coronial inquests, the investigation into the family court murders stalled. New cases came in, detectives were tasked elsewhere, the investigation wound down. The coroner had determined there wasn't enough evidence to name a suspect, and the police had no new evidence. The attacks had stopped. Eventually, the files were archived, and over the years, it turned into a cold case. No fresh leads came in, and the case grew colder and colder as the years went on. The timing of the attack suddenly stopping was interesting. At the time, Len knew he was being watched very closely by police. And Andrea had just caved and given him what he had been after all along: full custody of Trudy. Just another coincidence. As the years went on, the case disappeared from the public's minds, but not from the victims and the victims' families. They were left wondering if justice would ever be served. It began to look more and more unlikely as each year passed. There was a brutal, vicious and dangerous killer roaming the streets who had gotten away with some of the most serious crimes ever committed in Australia. Many of the people involved in the case went into hiding, too scared to utter a single word about it, living in complete fear, wondering if the attacker would come back for them. Some reporters over the years were even warned off the case, being told it was too dangerous. In 2013, 28 years after the last attack, a story ran in a Sydney newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, that the family law court murders case was being reviewed by the Unsolved Homicide team. The case had been out of the public's minds for many years, but it was a new time. New methods and new technologies were available to police. Not only that, the rules of how courts viewed circumstantial evidence had changed. They took circumstantial evidence into account differently now, particularly when there is motive and opportunity to back up the coincidences. As well as the newspaper article, Channel 7 also ran a story investigating the case, and a producer of that program, Debbie Marshall, wrote a book about it. The case was back in the public's minds, and it was being thoroughly investigated by police. And in 2015, when some had probably given up all hope,
about 11:30 this morning, we arrested a 68-year-old man in relation to 7 incidents that occurred between February 1980 and July 1985. These incidents include 4 murders and a number of attempted murders. There will be 32 charges laid against that individual, including 4 murder charges. This arrest resulted from a tenacious, very persistent investigation that goes back to early 2012, but in reality goes back 30 years to the 1980s. The tenacity of the detectives involved, the professionalism and commitment that's been shown by the team led by Detective Inspector Pam Young has been outstanding, and even though it's very early in the process, I have to commend them and say I'm very proud of the work that the Unsolved Homicide team have done. And there is a message here: if you have been involved or you have information about a murder that may be historic, you need to realise the door will never be closed on a murder investigation. It will always be there, and you need to come forward if you have any information. The evidence that we've gathered includes significant new evidence, historic evidence that has been enhanced using technology that was probably not available 30 years ago, witness evidence that is historic, as well as new witnesses evidence. When you add it all up, we felt and we feel that we have a very strong case, and we'll be proceeding with the charges today, as I mentioned.
As the Deputy had said, we anticipate laying a total of 32 charges today. I'll quickly go through those charges if I can. There will be 4 counts of murder relating to the murders of Stephen Blanchard in 1980, Justice David Opus in 1980, Mrs. Pearl Watson in 1984, and Mr. Graham Wykes in 1985. Attempted murder, 2 counts of destroy or damage building by explosive with intent to murder, 2 counts of maliciously cause explosive substance to explode with intent to do grievous bodily harm, 2 counts of blow up building, thereby endangering life, 3 counts of place gunpowder near building with intent to injure, 2 counts of place gunpowder near building with intent to damage, 2 counts of break, enter and commit felony in house of worship, blow up building whereby life endangered, and 13 counts of burn or maim by maliciously exploding another substance.
These crimes instilled a great deal of fear, particularly for those people who worked in and around the family law courts around that time. With today's arrest, we can't forget the people that lost their lives, and I want to mention them by name because today is about them. It's about those people. Mr. Stephen Blanchard, Justice David Opus, Mrs. Pearl Watson, and Mr. Graham Wykes. There are many other people who suffered during that time and continue to suffer today and carry the scars of those crimes. We haven't forgotten about those people.
This investigation commenced over 3 years ago by the Unsolved Homicide team. We have worked and built on the outstanding investigations conducted by our predecessors over 30 years ago. As many of you would be aware, these crimes were subject of a joint New South Wales Police Force, Australian Federal Police task force that lasted over 5 years, and we have built on the work that they've done, and I want to commend those investigators from over 30 years ago who were some of the best that we've had, and I'm glad to say that their work has been followed through by some of the best we have now.
When these murders began, I was a uniformed police officer in the inner west, and I do recall very vividly there were many, many shifts that we were rostered for in pairs, sitting outside family law court judges and officials' homes. There was certainly a feeling of anxiety around the whole thing. I mean, there are 7 different attacks that are now the subject of the charges. None of them was solved, and people said, you haven't solved this, there is someone still out there who has committed these offences. So there's a certain amount of anxiety, and certainly among the police who are involved. The reality is that we have things that are available to us today that simply didn't exist 30 years ago, both in terms of information management, as I mentioned, fingerprints, DNA, all of that stuff was not available to investigators 35 years ago.
The case is still currently before the courts. On the 23rd of July 2008, young mother Helen Munnings disappeared from the port city of Burnie on the northwest coast of Tasmania, Australia. She was last seen by the father of her child, Adam Taylor, who picked her up for a drive that afternoon. His actions later that night were described as interesting. Extensive searches have been conducted, but no trace of Helen has ever been found. A few different theories were raised at the coronial inquest held into the case. Did Helen run away? Did she commit suicide? Or was she murdered? Helen Munnings was born on the 15th of March 1988. Little is known about Helen's father. She had no contact with him during her life. She was raised by her mother, Carol Munnings. Helen has an older brother, Mark, and 2 younger sisters, Linda and Catherine. Helen lived in Burnie her entire life. Burnie is a port city on the northwest coast of Tasmania. It has a population of about 20,000 people. The Burnie port, along with the forestry industry, provide the main source of revenue for the city. It is Tasmania's largest general cargo port. In 2004, Helen met Adam Taylor. Helen was 16 at the time and Adam was 30. They had a sexual encounter the night they met. Adam tried to pass off the blame for this encounter by saying he was heavily affected by alcohol, and it was Helen who came onto him. He really didn't know what he was doing, or couldn't even remember really what happened. Helen instantly fell in love with Adam and thought of him as her soulmate. They remained friends after this initial encounter, but when Helen turned 17, Adam says she started pressuring him to commence a full-blown relationship. Adam says he only agreed to a sexual relationship with Helen because she threatened to go to the police about their initial encounter when she was only 16. Adam says he was scared, so he agreed to Helen's wishes. The age of consent in Tasmania is 17 years of age. Not long after, Helen fell pregnant, and in 2006 she gave birth to her son Tom. Tom is not her son's real name, that has been changed for this story. Helen was 18 years old at the time, Adam was 32. Adam at first denied that he was the father, but a paternity test said otherwise. This presented a problem for Adam. He was already in a long-term de facto relationship with his partner Carolina. and they had 2 children together. He told Carolina that Tom had been conceived with Helen whilst they were on a break in their relationship.
A man who had a child with missing Burnie woman Helen Munnings has told an inquest she blackmailed him into having sex. Adam Taylor admitted first having sex with Ms Munnings when she was 16 years old.
Helen Munnings disappeared in July 2008 when she was 20 years old. She had a 2-year-old son with Adam Taylor, a man 15 years her senior. The inquest has heard about Mr Taylor's sexual history with Ms Munnings. Mr Taylor told the court he had sex with her once before she was 17 and then about a dozen times between 2004 and 2007. Mr Taylor said after Ms Munnings' 17th birthday, she threatened to tell police about their sexual encounter when she was underage if he didn't leave his partner. When she turned 17, that's when she started getting all crazy about it. Mr Taylor said he slept with Ms Munnings after that to keep her happy because he was scared he'd go to jail for having sex with a minor. The counsel assisting the coroner, Simon Brown, asked Mr Taylor, "You had sex with her because you were scared?" Mr Taylor replied, "Yes." Mr Taylor said he was not attracted to Ms Munnings and had contemplated suicide after sleeping with her. He said Ms Munnings had also threatened to harm his partner, who was pregnant to Mr Taylor.
Given they now had a son together, the relationship between Helen and Adam had to continue on some level. Carolina was of the understanding that there would be no ongoing physical relationship between them and they would only remain in contact over issues concerning Tom. But the evidence suggests Adam lied to Carolina and continued his relationship with Helen. Adam described Helen's behaviour towards him as at times demanding, unpredictable, aggressive, and antagonistic. Helen constantly sent text messages and made phone calls to Adam about Tom. This obviously created difficulties in Adam's long-term relationship with Carolina. There were already difficulties due to what had happened, but now Helen wasn't making it any easier. It led to a deal being made whereby all contact from Helen was to be sent to Adam's mother, Judy Taylor. Carolina was of the belief that there would be no personal contact between Adam and Helen at all. But despite professing his wish to maintain his relationship with Carolina, he continued his relationship with Helen. He took active steps to try and keep it quiet, such as buying a second phone. Adam tried to deny that he maintained an intimate relationship with Helen, but text messages between them revealed otherwise. Carol Munnings, Helen's mother, strongly disapproved of Adam Taylor, her main concern being the big age difference between them. But she had concerns about Adam's treatment of Helen and his motives for continuing the relationship. She did everything in her power to prevent the relationship from continuing. She made several complaints to the police, adamant that Adam had broken the law.
Helen Munnings' mother, Carol, has been representing her family in court. During her questioning of Mr Taylor, Ms Munnings made heated accusations about him controlling her daughter. She said, "You were the cause of Helen's problems. You were the adult. Helen was the child." Mr Taylor said Carol Munnings had made threats and allegations against him over the years they'd known each other.
But Helen only had eyes for Adam, and Carol's actions were the cause of some conflict between them. They had numerous arguments, and it actually got so bad that at one point they each had restraining orders out against each other. At the time of her disappearance, Helen was living in a block of units owned by her mother Carol in Burnie. Helen lived in Unit 3 and Carol lived upstairs in Unit 1. Helen and Tom had only been living there for a few weeks, having stayed at various other places prior to that. Tom was being cared for on a split week-by-week basis. Helen would have him for 1 week, then Adam would have him for the following week, and so on. Helen owned a car but didn't have a driver's licence, so she usually walked wherever she wanted to go, or relied on lifts by family and friends. On the 8th of July 2008, only a few weeks before she disappeared, Helen dropped a bombshell on Adam. She told him she was pregnant again. Together they went to a local pharmacy in Burnie where Helen purchased a pregnancy test. She took the test and then showed Adam the result. Adam strongly denies he was the father and says Helen told him that she was pregnant as a result of a drunken one-night stand with a male that she didn't name. But Helen's friends and family say there was nobody else that Helen had eyes for and that Adam definitely would have been the father. The coroner later found Adam's story about the drunken one-night stand with an unnamed male to be untrue and said he was most likely the father. After initially being anxious and uncertain about the second child, Helen made the decision to keep it. Adam didn't support this. The reason he gave was that a second child would place additional demands on Helen's already tight financial situation, and it would compromise her ability to adequately look after Tom. That's the reason he says he was against it, but it's doubtful there would have been a way to keep it quiet that Helen was pregnant. Even if he wasn't the father, as he claims, Helen was going to name him the father. This wouldn't be good news. Remember, his mother and his current partner, Carolina, were of the belief Adam wasn't even speaking to Helen on the phone at this point. On Wednesday the 23rd of July 2008, Helen spent the day at home. Most of her time was actually spent up in Carol's unit. Tom was in the care of Adam at the time. In the early to mid-afternoon that day, Helen left and walked into the centre of town. She left the keys to her unit with Carol, and she didn't take a handbag with her either. She left that in her unit. Her handbag contained her mobile phone, her purse, and her medication. Her purse contained her bank cards and her Medicare card. Her mobile phone was left at home, but the SIM card had been removed. Due to problems she was having with her phone, it was common for Helen to remove her SIM card and use other people's phones. When she left the unit, Helen told Carol that she had a doctor's appointment. But checks with the medical centre revealed that she didn't have an appointment. She also left her Medicare card at home. She didn't go to the medical centre at all. Instead, she met up with Adam Taylor. Adam had been at work all day and arrived home at about 2:45 p.m. Tom was at home being cared for by his partner, Carolina. When he arrived home, he swapped cars. He left his car at home and got into his mother's Holden ute. He left home about 3:30 p.m. Carolina says she thinks Adam put a saw into the rear of his ute before he left. Adam says he and Helen had arranged to meet up during the day. He picked her up in his mother's ute near the Centrelink building about 4:20 p.m. This was actually captured on security camera footage, so it could be verified. But as for what happened next, we only have Adam's version. He says they went for a drive and talked for a while. They drove around until about 6 p.m. During the trip, he says that he and Helen talked about matters concerning their relationship that were distressing for Helen. He says Helen became upset and started crying. However, by the time he dropped her off, he says she appeared to have calmed down. Helen mostly talked about her pregnancy and said she didn't want to have an abortion. After they were finished, Adam says he dropped Helen off on the southern side of the Bass Highway in Burnie, near the old paper mill. He says he dropped Helen off here as she said she wanted to go for a walk along the beach to clear her head. The coroner later made comment at the inquest that this was an unusual thing to do, drop a young girl off at that location when it was getting dark. And it was some distance away from her home. It was roughly just over a 20-minute walk. After dropping Helen off, Adam says he headed home, which was about a 10-minute drive away from that location. But before getting home, he pulled over to have a think about what he and Helen had just discussed. He then sent a text message to Helen. The message was sent at 6:08 p.m. The message said, "Keep your chin up." There was no response, but remember, Helen didn't have a phone with her. She just had a SIM card. Adam returned home shortly after sending the text message to Helen. When he got home, he commented that he thought someone had tried to steal the small boat that they kept in their yard. The boat belonged to Carolina's brother. Adam said somebody had dragged the boat from the yard where it is usually kept down to the water's edge. He told Carolina that he was going down to drag the boat back up. But he first put it in the water, started the motor up and drove it out a short distance before turning around and bringing it back in. By now it was dark. Adam then spent some time out in his back shed. But Carolina said that wasn't unusual and he would often do that at night time. The water's edge that Adam lived on at the time was actually the Bass Strait, the large stretch of ocean that separates Tasmania from the rest of Australia. That next morning, Adam loaded the boat onto a trailer and took it back to Carolina's brother's house. Carol became concerned as the evening went on that Helen hadn't returned home. She used Helen's keys to let herself into Helen's unit, but there was no sign of her. Carol remained worried, but when Helen didn't come back the next day, the worry turned into full-blown panic. That next day, the 24th of July, just after lunch, Carol reported her concern to the police. And when Helen still hadn't returned home by that night, Carol went back to the police station to make a formal statement. Helen was scheduled to pick Tom up on Friday, the 25th of July, but she failed to turn up. On the 28th and 29th of July, police commenced a sea, land and air search. The searching area was expanded the next month. A helicopter, divers and a ground search crew were used. Despite an extensive search, no trace of Helen was ever found. The information about Adam's movements with the boat the night Helen disappeared didn't become known until sometime much later, and a search of the ocean outside his home wasn't done until June 2009, nearly a full year after Helen had disappeared. The only thing of interest they found out in the water was a 9-litre bucket filled with concrete. Embedded in the concrete at the top was a small wire loop, and a length of synthetic rope was attached. Adam admitted that it was his bucket. The coroner said he couldn't draw any conclusions from the bucket. It was found in a location which meant it was covered by only about half a metre of water at low tide. Adam said the bucket was there as he used it to secure the boat at times. However, police divers have said that it was found in an area where it would not have had a purpose for being a boat mooring. The rope was tested for human fibres, but none were found. But given it had been in the ocean for nearly a year, if there was anything to find, it could have been washed away long ago. Likewise, if there was any other evidence to find out there, that too could have been washed away long ago. It was almost 1 year after Helen's disappearance that the search was done, and the Bass Strait Ocean is notoriously rough and known for strong currents. The boat was forensically tested, but that also returned no result. There is no evidence that Helen Munnings made contact with anyone after being dropped off by Adam Taylor about 6 p.m, the 23rd of July 2008. Adam is the last known person to see her alive. There is no evidence to tell us what happened to Helen exactly, but there are only a few possibilities. The first being that she ran away and is still alive and living somewhere else. This was the scenario presented by Adam at the coronial inquest. Helen was young and had lived her entire life in Burnie. All her friends were in Burnie and most of her family. She had limited education, limited income and no savings. She left her purse and all of her cards at home. She didn't take any clothing or personal belongings with her at all. She had never mentioned to anyone about ever wanting to leave or to run away. Extensive checks were conducted around the country and there is no record of her showing up anywhere. Her bank accounts haven't been accessed since the day she disappeared. Plus, Helen was pregnant at the time. She would have required some kind of medical treatment, and there is no record of that ever happening. Not to mention, it would also mean she would have had to have abandoned her son Tom, whom she was extremely devoted to. Helen didn't run away, and the coroner actually rejected the suggestion that she ran away. The possibility that Helen may have committed suicide was also raised. Although there was some evidence that Helen had spoken about or sent some text messages to friends about suicide, it was only in a very general and conversational way. There is no evidence at all that she had ever made an attempt or a serious threat of suicide. And again, it would mean abandoning Tom. Although Helen had at times been down before, there was evidence that she was actively making plans for her future. Suicide doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, especially considering her body still hasn't been found, which is unusual for cases of suicide. Also, she would have had very limited means to commit suicide. She had nothing with her to harm herself with. The coroner, though, didn't rule it out entirely. He said it remains a possibility, and the fact her body was never found would be unusual if it was a case of suicide, but it didn't remove the possibility entirely. One example the coroner cited would be that if Helen had swum out into the ocean so far that she couldn't return. But most believe Helen was murdered. There is no direct evidence to suggest another person is responsible for Helen's death. There is no direct evidence tying anyone to Helen's disappearance, including Adam Taylor. Having said that, there's also no evidence to corroborate Adam Taylor's version of what happened that afternoon. We just have his word for it. The coroner found he wasn't telling the truth about his account of the nature of his relationship with Helen. Adam was trying to say it had finished and he wasn't seeing her any longer, but text messages found between them painted a very different picture. In fact, he took active steps to conceal his relationship with Helen from Carolina and his mother. Helen's disappearance coincided with a time that Adam was trying to preserve his relationship with Carolina, in circumstances that had been difficult for some time. The fact Helen was pregnant again would have impacted Adam in a number of ways. The obvious one would be the increased strain that it would put on his already strained relationship with Carolina. There are also concerns whether the journey he described to police would have taken the 1 hour and 40 minutes he says he was with Helen. And his story of the route they took during their drive changed. He gave two different versions of where exactly they went. The coroner commented that just because Adam had been untruthful about the extent of his relationship with Helen, it didn't mean he was lying about his account of what happened that afternoon. Likewise, the coroner said no conclusions could be made from the inconsistencies in his account of where exactly they drove to that afternoon and what way they went. The behaviour with the boat was interesting, but the coroner ruled Adam's version wasn't far-fetched and could quite likely be true. Carol and Helen's grandmother visited Adam a few days after Helen's disappearance. Her grandmother alleges Adam made a statement to her which indicated he knew Helen was never coming back. Adam denies this happened. Carol claims that in October 2009 she approached Adam in a supermarket and asked him where Helen's body was. She alleges that Adam threatened her, saying, "You'll get the same done to you that Helen did." Adam, of course, strongly denies ever saying that. The coroner had significant reservations about how true Carol and Helen's grandmother's allegations are, given the amount of ill will Carol and the grandmother have towards Adam. The coroner doubted these comments were ever made. Effectively, he was saying he believes Carol and Helen's grandmother made it up. And he went on to say even if Adam had made these comments, he wouldn't regard either statement as an admission of guilt. The coronial inquest was held over 9 separate days between the 29th of November 2011 and the 12th of January 2012. On the 14th of June 2012, Coroner Robert Pearce made his official ruling.
The coroner's found missing Burnie woman Helen Munnings is dead, but he hasn't been able to say how she died. Her family maintains she was murdered and is seeking further legal advice on the case. Selena Bryan reports.
20-year-old Helen Munnings disappeared 4 years ago. Her body has never been found, despite years of searching. Over 9 days, the coroner Robert Pearce heard evidence from more than 40 witnesses. Today, he handed down his finding, saying Helen Munnings died on or about the 23rd of July 2008, most likely in or around Burnie. But the coroner said the evidence doesn't enable a finding of how her death occurred or the cause. The coroner said there was a possibility Ms Munnings took her own life, but that was reduced because of her love for her young son. Ms Munnings was last seen going for a drive with Adam Taylor, the father of the boy. The coroner found it was likely that at the time of her disappearance, Helen Munnings was pregnant, and likely that Adam Taylor was the father. The counsel assisting told the inquest Mr Taylor had the motive and opportunity to kill Ms Munnings. Her mother hopes the findings allow police to further investigate how her daughter died.
We're pretty pleased that it's acknowledged that Helen is dead, and hoping that it gives the CIB more clout.
The coroner said there was no scientific or forensic evidence to find Mr. Taylor contributed to the death. He said he found fanciful a suggestion by Mr. Taylor's counsel that Ms. Munnings is alive in Darwin. Her mother says she's seeking legal advice on what she believes was a police conflict of interest when the investigation began.
I'm claiming that the case wasn't dealt with properly at the beginning because of the conflict.
Police say the investigation has been reviewed several times with no adverse findings. The investigation into Helen Munnings' death remains active and ongoing. Police still want to speak to anyone with information about how the young woman died. Selena Bryan, ABC News, Burnie.
The case is still open. There is currently a $100,000 reward for any information regarding Helen's disappearance.